Well, hello everyone. We are going to continue today with our look at the various teams in the top 25 of last year. We're going to look at the team that finished fifth last year, the Florida State Seminoles. Quick recap of last year: Florida State went 13 and 0. Now you would think that would be enough to put a team in a playoff by going 13 and 0 and winning a Power 5 conference. However, in controversial faction that people still debate to this day, Florida State actually got left out. Now, the reasoning that was given to us is simply because it's there's a myth that says Florida State was excluded simply because of the Jordan Travis injury. The Jordan Travis injury was part of it, but it's part of a bigger thing where Florida State, they believe that Alabama would have a better chance of beating Michigan because they had a full roster that was a proven winner. Yes, they did lose to Texas. I know Alabama lost to Texas, which was kind of inexcusable. But throughout the stretch, Alabama was doing well, and they had just knocked off the number one team. Whereas Florida State, on the other hand, ever since Travis's injury, they were starting to struggle a little bit, as evidenced by their performance in the ACC title game. So I actually do think the playoff committee did make the right decision. However, the whole controversy is indicative of why the four-team playoff is too narrow, and B, why we need clearer criteria to determine what the playoff means by the best teams. Because that was simply the only qualification, was what four teams are the best. I hope I don't sound too much like I'm trying to put y'all through school here, but the word best is a very, what we call, relative word, meaning that there's not a way to actually determine who's the best. You can look at their records, you can look at what conference they won, you can look at how good offensively they were, how good defensively they were, who their best wins were against, but you're not going to determine who the best four teams are, and that was the weakness of the college football playoff. We saw that in 2016 when they put in Ohio State over the team that actually won the Big Ten. We saw that. Now, granted, ultimately, we can see sure the right decision was made in 2017, but we did see this to an extent in 2017 when Alabama was put in over Ohio State. We saw it in 2018 when Oklahoma was put in over Georgia. We saw it in 2020 when Notre Dame was put in over Texas A&M. We saw it in 2022 when TCU and Ohio State were put in over Alabama. And we saw it last year. And the sad thing is, 2017, we know for sure the right decision was made because, well, Bama won the championship that year. But in the cases of 2016, 2018, 2020, and 2022, we will never know if the right decision was made because the team that was put in either lost in the first round or got blown out in the championship game. And unless we cannot go back in time to make the other decision and see if the other decision would have worked out. But I know I kind of went on a rant there, but the whole Florida State debacle, along with the other debacles that I just mentioned, are indicative of why the 14 playoff was too narrow and why the playoff needs to be more clear with what they mean by the best teams. Anyway, enough with the mini rant. Florida State instead goes to the Orange Bowl, where if you watched VicTube and I's video from the other day, you already know the result. Georgia blows it blows Florida State out like a spike towards a tire. 63-3. A lot of people are saying that's indicative of why you should have put Bama in there. But anyway, again, we will never know for sure, but we have what we have, and what we have was Florida State got blown out. Now, Florida State is losing quite a bit of pieces. I want to say they lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 players, combination of seniors and the transfer portal. Biggest one they lose is Jordan Travis. He got knocked out of the game against, I want to say it's Western Carolina. It was some FCS school that Jordan Travis got knocked out of the game due to a season-ending injury, ending his Heisman hopes and arguably for Florida State's playoff hopes. The backup quarterback, I believe, is on the roster. However, they also bring in a quarterback who is familiar to the ACC, albeit with a different team. He played with Clemson for a couple years. Then he transferred out to the West Coast to Oregon State, where he played for 1 year. Then now he's back in the ACC at Florida State. His name is I'm probably going to butcher his last name. DJ Uyunglele. Now, there's mixed opinions a lot on DJ Uyunglele. A lot of people say that without Dabo Swinney's conservative offense, DJ Uyunglele is going to do better. But there's others who are kind of low on DJ Uyunglele. My take is that I'm somewhere in between those two. I think he could get better because Mike Norvell's offense is a lot more geared towards improving players than Dabo Swinney's offense is. But I also don't think he's going to be a Jaden Daniels LSU or Joe Burrow LSU or whatever quarterback transferred and became a Heisman caliber quarterback. It's going to be somewhere in the middle of those two statements that I just made with DJ Uyunglele. I'm going to go ahead and state right now that I don't think Florida State's offense is going to be as good this year with DJ Uyunglele as it was last year with Jordan Travis. That doesn't mean Florida State falls off a cliff, but I do think Florida State's offense is going to be a little bit worse last year than is going to be worse this coming year than it was last year. Now, other pieces, Mike Norvell is going to stay as head coach. So let's get into Florida State's schedule for 2024. Now, one thing I want to mention right off the bat is that let me make sure I'm looking at this. Yeah. I've mentioned in my other videos I've done so far for schedule previews that each team gets 2 bye weeks. Florida State gets a very rare 3 bye weeks. On top of what I've said, where each team is guaranteed 2 bye weeks because the way the calendar worked out, you have an extra Saturday in between Labor Day weekend and Thanksgiving weekend. Florida State actually plays a week 0 game, which if you're unfamiliar with what week 0 is, think of it as a preseason game that actually counts. There's only like 7 games in week 0 as compared to the bunch of games that's on in week 1 onwards. So it feels like a preseason game, although it actually counts towards the regular season record. But every team that plays a week 0 game gets an extra bye week. So on top of the 2 guaranteed bye weeks, Florida State also gets a 3rd bye week because they drew a week 0 game. Actually, I'm not sure if it's determined. Somebody tell me in the comments section if you know for sure how week 0 games are determined. I'm not sure 100% if it's each team can try to get a week 0 game, and if the 2 teams agree, then they'll play it in week 0, or if the NCAA determines it by random draw. But it's one of those two methods that determines whether a team gets a week 0 game. But anyway, Florida State kicks off in week 0. They're going to go to Dublin, Ireland, strangely, to play Georgia Tech. Now, Georgia Tech last year improved. They've moved on from their horrible head coach Jeff Collins. Brent Key so far has worked out well, and there's a lot of expectations that they'll improve further in 2022. I'm sorry, 2024. I myself think Georgia Tech is going to be better in 2024 than they were in 2023. However, I do not think Georgia Tech is going to beat Florida State. I have Florida State getting the win over Georgia Tech. Then you come back to the United States, actually come back home, and you play Boston College. Boston College. The ACC is already a considerably weaker conference than the SEC, the Big Ten, or even the Big 12. Which, to clarify, I do not think the Big 12 is a bad conference. Somebody said in my Texas video that I kind of downgraded the Big 12 from what it actually is. Big 12 is not a bad conference. I think there's some good teams in there like Oklahoma State, Kansas State, UCF, and all them, but I just don't think that the Big 12 is as good as the Big 10 or the SEC. Just wanted to clarify that from a previous video. But anyway, ACC already not so good Power 4 conference. Boston College is probably the worst team in the ACC. I know a lot of people say it's Virginia, Stanford coming in. They're pretty bad, but Boston College might be worse than all of them. I think you barely beat them last year, but I think you should dominate Boston College this year. Then you get your first bye week. Then you play Memphis. Memphis, they have their good years for a group of 5 school, but I don't think they're going to. Some people have them going to the playoff as the group of 5 representative. Even if they have a season that's like that, I don't think that they're beating Florida State. So give me Florida State. Then you begin. Well, you already began your conference play, but then you get your next conference opponent, the Cal Bears. The ACC is kind of strange this year. They have 2 teams coming in from the West Coast. What happened with the fall of the Pac-12? There's a couple of teams that were not getting into the Big 12 or the Big 10, but really wanted to get into a power conference, and so they accepted a bid to go to the ACC. Cal is one of them. You play them in Florida, in the state of Florida, Tallahassee. Cal, not really impressed with them. I think you should dominate Cal. Then you get a team that's coming from the group of 5 to join the ACC, SMU. If SMU were still a group of 5 team, I would have probably had them as the group of 5 representative for the playoff. But I think this is a really rare case where going to a Power 5 conference actually hurts your chances of getting into the playoff. SMU, if they would have stayed a group of 5 team this coming year, would have been basically a shoo-in, as long as they don't do anything stupid, to get the group of 5's bid for the representative in the playoff. But they jumped to the ACC, and the competition is going to be a lot stronger. Yes, even the ACC, which is probably the worst of the Power 4 conferences, is leaps and bounds ahead of the best group of 5 conference. And I think Florida State should be able to get the win over SMU. I know it's at SMU, but I do think Florida State's going to get the win. Then you get one of your 3 games that are going to look to challenge Florida State. The first one is at home. Luckily, you get this at home against Clemson. Now, last year, I think Florida State should have won by more against Clemson than what they did. It ended up being a 2 point game. I think they probably should have won by multiple possessions against Clemson. Look, Clemson's still a pretty good team. They still got a lot of talent. Dabo Sweeney, I believe, may be the best coach from an in-game standpoint. He's not the best coach overall, but he's probably the best from an in-game standpoint. But Clemson has fallen from where they were in 2016, 2018, even 2020, the last time they made the playoff. And the reason why is because of the transfer portal. VicTube and I discussed it in the other day's video. I understand Dabo Sweeney's remarks that you cannot build a roster through the transfer portal. That is really true. I mean, just ask Deion Sanders from Colorado. You cannot build a roster solely off transfer portal. However, you cannot, if you have holes in your roster, like Clemson's had holes in their roster since 2020, your best bet is to go into the transfer portal. Because if you're using your own solely your recruited players, guess what? If you have to plug a hole, you have no choice but to use somebody who more than likely has not taken a snap at the college football level, doesn't know the system quite well. Whereas if you go into the transfer portal, chances are you're getting somebody who at least has some experience. Maybe not starting experience, but at least some experience at that position. But Dabo has yet to take a single transfer in his career ever since the transfer portal became a thing. It's starting to show. Last year, Clemson went 9-4, a far cry, from what they're used to. This is not a knock on Dabo as a coach in game. Like I said, Dabo Sweeney in game is even better than Kirby Smart. But off the field, management is where he's starting to lack. And unless he changes his philosophy, I think that this downward trend Clemson's been on is going to continue. I also do not have a lot of faith in Cade Klubnik. I mentioned this also in the video I did with VicTube the other day. Klubnik was hyped up as the next big thing. He hasn't really shown us that. He's shown some flashes, but he's had a turnover in almost every game he's had as a starter. I really don't see anything special with Cade Klubnik. And I think that Florida State should be able to beat Clemson. And also, there's going to be an emotionality sort of aspect to it because DJ, he's a former Clemson quarterback. The transfer portal guy that was brought in to Florida State. So there's going to be some emotionality aspect. I think Florida State should be able to beat Clemson. Then you get your second bye week, and then you go on the road to play Duke. Duke, they had an out-of-nowhere good season, but they are going to lose their head coach, Mike Elko. Mike Elko built that roster that we know that had the surprise season last year at Duke. And I don't really have a lot of expectations for Duke this year. I think Florida State should be able to beat Duke this year. Then you go on the road to play Miami, Florida. Now, Miami has a talented roster. They almost always have a talented roster. But yet, I don't know what is wrong with Miami. I don't know if it's at the upper echelons of the athletic department, maybe the athletic director. But Miami, even though they constantly, year in and year out, have lots of talent, they never seem to make the big bowl game. They never seem to win the ACC. They've only even made it to the ACC title game once since 2005 when they joined. And under head coach Mario Cristobal, it's continued like that. First year under Mario Cristobal, they went 5-7. Last year, they only managed a 7-6 record, and really, the season was epitomized in the last minute of the Georgia Tech game last year. We all know what happened there. Um, Mario Cristobal should have gone for a kneel down to run the clock out. Instead, he chooses to run the ball. Miami fumbles. Georgia Tech recovers the ball, and at the last second, Georgia Tech's in the end zone to win the game. Mario Cristobal is a good recruiter. He was a good talent manager, but I don't know if he's cut out to be the Miami head coach. This season is going to be the tell-all as to whether or not Miami should keep Mario Cristobal, or if it's time to move on from Mario Cristobal, or maybe it's just a problem with Miami's athletic department as a whole ever since they moved to the ACC. But either way, Miami has to improve from last year to really justify keeping Mario Cristobal. I'm having a debating whether they win the game or not. Ultimately, though, in the big games, Mario Cristobal has shown no ability to win them. That's why I'm going to go with Florida State. I think Mario Cristobal cost Miami yet again. Then you're back home against North Carolina. North Carolina last year was talented, but they really didn't do too much to woo us in the ACC. Now they lose Drake May to the NFL, and I think that's going to make North Carolina a little bit worse than they were last year. I wouldn't be surprised if North Carolina barely makes a bowl game or even doesn't make a bowl game. I think Florida State should be able to handle North Carolina this year and win. Then you have who I think is Florida State's toughest opponent. You go on the road to play Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame has steadily improved in the years they've had under Marcus Freeman, their head coach. He took over in 2022. First year was a little bit rocky. Last year seemed like he figured it out, other than like the last minute of the Ohio State game. I know we make a lot of fun in the college football community about how Notre Dame cannot win the big game, the big bowl game. They're never going to win another national title as long as time exists and all that. But you cannot deny in the regular season, Notre Dame is usually good. And I think that's going to be the case this year. I think Notre Dame's going to have their best season so far under Marcus Freeman. And I think Notre Dame beats Florida State. Something about Florida State this year makes it seem like they are going to lose a game somewhere on this schedule. And I think the most likely game that it's another Georgia situation where they could go undefeated, but something about them makes it look like they're probably not going to go undefeated, especially with their schedule. And I think Notre Dame's going to be the one that beats Florida State. Then you get your last bye week, and you're going to play Charleston Southern. Hopefully you don't get your quarterback injured against your FCS opponent like you did last year. But even if that somehow happens in a doomsday scenario, I don't think you're losing to Charleston Southern. I think you probably win by north of 50 points against Charleston Southern. Then your last game of the season is going to be against your non-conference rival, the Florida Gators. I cannot add anything about how bad Florida is that hasn't either already been said by somebody else in the college football community or hasn't been said by me. Billy Napier has just horribly mismanaged Florida. They cannot keep good talent. Bad in-game management. And really and truly, you should not expect a lot from Florida State. I'm sorry, Florida State fans. What I meant to say was you should not expect a lot from Florida this year. Now, I know a lot of you are going to point out that the last 2 years, Florida has gotten an unexpected win when nobody thought they were going to get the win. They beat Utah in the first week of the season in 2022, and they did get a surprise upset win over Tennessee last year. But even in those games, there's something that told you Florida may woo some people. This Florida team has no indication that they're going to woo people. It has all the indications that they're headed for a sub 500 year. I think Billy Napier's probably gone by the time the Florida game is played, and I think Florida State dominates Florida. So there you go. I have Florida State going 11-1 in 2024, with their lone loss being to Notre Dame. I also think Florida State is going to go to the ACC title game. I don't think it's necessarily a hot take to say Florida State goes to the ACC title game. A lot of people have Florida State as their favorite to win the ACC, and I don't think that's a hot take either. I'm going to reveal who I think wins each Power 4 conference probably about a week before week 0, but I do think Florida State wins, or I should say, he at least gets to the ACC title game. I also think there's a 75% chance they make the playoff this year, especially with it being 12 teams. But anyway, that's my take on Florida State and how I think they're going to do in 2024. Coming up next, I'm going to go ahead and do the lone Power 4 conference I have yet to look at yet, and it's going to be the Big 12. I'm going to look at the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Until then, I'm out of here. I'll see you in the next video.